Thank you, Andrea. Indeed, I will use the next 30 minutes to demonstrate how we can lower the cost of clinical trial. No. But maybe thinking out of the box or offering some food for thought, I hope so. Indeed, I'm one of the veterans, so to speak, of the orphan diseases. I think that to the question that was asked before of giving me examples of a very successful endeavors between a collaboration between patients, regulators, academia, and physicians for orphan diseases, may I timidly quote our company, Genzyme. We were born in 1981 because of a scientific idea, but the company wouldn't exist if the very brave mother, the mother of, she was also, by the way, the medical director of the National Gaucher Foundation in United States, would not really partner with, in the early days of the company, and try to find in the market the money just to run the clinical trials with the company. I think that this, you are talking of 1983, so a little bit of some time ago. But if you see, you know, what has generated that attempt and that collaboration together, NIH, where they discovered the first technology, so the science, the industrial part, and the patients. I think that is remarkable. We have to think out of the box. So today my task is very difficult because I've been asked to tell you, or definitely try to discuss with you strategies for ensuring, I found it, this was the title of the organizer, ensuring is a little bit, to me, quite a strong term. I don't think that is so easy in these days to ensure reimbursement, but I would prefer to say more patient access. Patient access has to be our goal. I always said as a physician and initially as a scientist, I started my career more as a scientist and a physician before joining industry. For me, every unit of a drug sold in a rare disease is that obviously contributed to the return on the investment for the company, but was also possibly if an unmet medical need satisfied. So patient access is important. If you don't have patient access, we have nothing. So the objectives of the talk are I gave a similar talk in the United States a few months ago, so I tried to tweak it because obviously it's very fashionable to specifically to have somebody that has 20 years on that scene to understand why we were, I would say, quite successful in the beginning. But I will try to angle in a little bit different way some consideration. But we have to reflect. I always think that we have to do three ways when we talk. Reflect on the achievement a little bit that we have done, where we are, so the current trends, and I would say rattle the cage, steer the brain in order to engage in the discussion. With all what was said rightfully this morning, what can we do in order to maintain sustainability, approvability, but also reimbursability of these drugs? Very busy slide, but just to say that let's pause always 1 second. I'm sure that many others will do. We are at the Orphan Drug Congress. As I said, in the United States, it's remarkable that even in a Congress like this one, we have a room like this full. When we started 20 years ago, nobody cared of orphan diseases. The first Congress that we had, you know, for Gaucher's disease, that is one of the many thousands diseases, we were like, I think, 15 people that were interested in that. So we have really to applaud to all of us that are working in these fascinating fields. I was talking with somebody during the break, and I'm in love with rare diseases for many reasons. Why? First of all, they are scientifically incredibly interesting. They can really teach you a lot in terms of scientific and medical science. But I think that in the current days, where you see many that are escaping the primary care and going to this specialty therapeutic field, rare disease and personalized health, rare diseases are by extreme the most personalized health type of treatment you can design. So they are really fascinating, and we should use them many times as a paradigm for discovery and science, but maybe also for finding new ways for reimbursement. legislation was extremely important in our field, and I have to applaud the new countries, lately Mexico and Argentina, that even in those jurisdictions have enacted their orphan drug law, and most recently, I would say a week ago, even Russia, President Medvedev signed a sort of orphan drug act where they will ensure reimbursement of certain diseases. If I go back again to those countries, which I know, that country that I know very well only 10 years ago, so not much, 10 years ago, there was nothing for rare diseases, not even the knowledge of the rare diseases. So after 10 years of patient advocacy, consortium of industries, then also politicians moved, and last week a big milestone achievement for rare diseases in Russia. Today, where we are, lesson learned, I just put something because reimbursement is not only health economics or pharmacoeconomic evaluation. We need to know rare diseases, and we know rare diseases today far better than we knew them 20 years ago. We know that are, of course, of genetic origin, they affect the children, but also, and this is very important, diagnosis of rare diseases are often late in the course of the disease. That's a big issue from a reimbursement standpoint when you want to measure clinical efficacy, because you maybe missed the good part of the natural history of the disease until after so many physicians, so many medical centers, you have discovered that that kid had that condition. And then many times that condition is not known very well by the physicians, and so then its diagnosis comes extremely late. And as you know, and many of you that are working in clinical development with rare diseases, then they know that the earlier the better, and in some cases dramatically, like we had, and Hans knows this very well, the Pompe's disease case, that in the classical form, if you do not treat the patients in the very first few months of life, you really lose the patient. So it's not the patient got better or worse, the patients die. Diagnosis is important. We know also that treating rare diseases is more than providing a simple medicine. This is, I think, is another very important point. So, again, diagnosis, the tools of diagnostic tools and the training programs. You know that by the sheer principle, when we initiated cases, compassionate case programs for children with Gaucher's disease in less fortunate jurisdictions than the Western world, we discovered immediately that giving the drug was just the beginning. You could have given a ton of drugs to these kids, but these kids were not treated well. What's much more important that the drug came after training of the physician, building center of excellence, and education. So that's extremely important. And this goes back also to the reimbursement. It is not only the drug, it is what is around the drug, because a patient needs to have a holistic care that is sometimes even beyond, the drug. The right treatment, the right dose, at the right time, the classical paradigm, and the fact that I said is an holistic approach. But also, coming back to the clinical development, we understand better the challenges of developing the treatment for rare diseases. And I do not want to sweat on all of the points. These are known by majority of you and have repeated and will be repeated many times today during the presentation. Small and geographically dispersed population, low prevalence, heterogeneity, which again, this is something these are important points when we sit down with payers afterwards, and then we have to try to devise a sort of trial or registry, and then and you know better than I do, then when we try to dissect that apple has different colors at each slide, and then it becomes difficult, and sometimes they are really different diseases, and then maybe they are a sort of continuum, and you might think that this is a trivial argument, but you know what? Even taxonomy of the disease is becoming a problem, because calling definitely a disease a form of disease, that type of disease, and obtaining, for instance, the reimbursability for that disease, aspect of the disease, and maybe in another jurisdiction, the same phenotypic presentation is called in a different way. Maybe, again, you can smile about it, but it can cause you delays in patient access, simply for the taxonomy of the disease. So that is not to be, neglected. We will talk, and more will be, I think, discussed around surrogate endpoints. because of the slow progression of the disease, real capturing real clinical benefit or, more than efficacy, effectiveness, which should be efficacy in the real clinical world, could really take years, or maybe could be, we have to adapt ourselves to a different way of measuring it. Surrogate endpoints are sometimes much more apparent and directly correlated with benefit than really clinical symptoms. Regulators, as I would say, already embraced this. I would say that they were a little bit more, in my experience, open a few years ago. Then after this initial wave of acceptance, now they're becoming a little bit more orthodox, maybe pushed also by the fact that they want to give an assessment report that will be much more viable for the payers afterwards. But I think that the times where we approved a drug for Fabry's disease based on a number of cells that are, and the percent of cells that were with inclusions of DL3, which is indeed an indirect marker of renal clearance of the substrates, are probably almost gone even from the regulatory standpoint. Let be alone the fact that the payer will get nothing by looking at these beautiful slides where you will see something that for scientists is phenomenally important, but from maybe a payer is less intuitive than what will be maybe the percent decline or the number of patients dialyzed in these patient populations. I said already in my comment before, post-approval commitments. This is really a burden. I agree that with the comment was made by the colleagues of Shire that we should do better. Sometimes, let's be only honest, many companies, specifically the smaller one, for very understandable reasons, are trying to bring to regulatory approval drugs that are, may I say provocatively, semi-developed. They have a little bit, we should do a little bit more. The challenge is that if there would be a faster patient access afterwards, I would be very in agreement to say, let's complete all of the studies that we need to do. But many times it's very difficult when you have a drug, and I think that many of you that have had to deal with a lethal condition and have received pressures in the field that we have tackled and Hans is tackling, it's quite difficult. Tell a Duchenne patient that has a promise of a treatment not to access treatment, even when there are very early data, is difficult. So we need to really calibrate always in rare diseases what maybe in a more larger, prevalent diseases is easier to say, let's wait to complete all the clinical trials and the double-blind placebo randomized clinical trial and so. But this brings a burden on the company that is enormous. Many times, at least in our calculation, we probably from an economic standpoint spent much more resources post-marketing than the pre-marketing, and so it has to be taken in consideration. So where we are today, I call it, and it's a similar slide I presented in the United States, there it was a very impactful, the perfect storm. It is the perfect storm. Somebody said it. We cannot be, with the news that everybody of us is looking on the Blackberries on the internet every day, the euro is the defaults of not companies, the defaults of nations. I think that can we ask ourselves the question, can and should orphan diseases be immune? I think that even if in my heart, as a physician, I would say all the diseases should be immune from economic considerations, they are not. Because they, even if, and I think that was a very good comment before, even if they indeed, and I agree, Ségolène quoted a very important article that we are, telling since ages to the payers that we really represent in toto a really minutiae, a nail, not even a nail, a tip of a nail when compared to the budget of a pharmaceutical. But notwithstanding that, we are seeing in every jurisdiction, even I would say in countries that were the first 20 years to embrace with no problem of reimbursability the orphan diseases, In the same countries, we see now maybe a little bit more the pendulum that has swung in the other direction and wanting to have maybe a rigid cost effectiveness discussion for an orphan drug, which I think is very, very difficult. I'm talking of cost effectiveness, not value considerations, not other impacts. So it's obvious that evidentiary requirements are tied to reimbursement, and they are influencing the clinical program. And you know, there are other, I think, speakers that will illustrate, I think, during this meeting, the CAVOD, the clinical added value of orphan drug program. I think that it was already quoted before, the value pricing discussion in the UK. And it's obviously that we need to have this collaboration and another, you know, theme between regulators and payers. The other challenge that we have, that you know, we are in Europe, and we are not, obviously in these days even more, the United States of Europe. Everybody wants to save the euro, but with their Italian, Swiss, not Swiss, not, I'm sorry, you are in Switzerland, so I pay tribute to Swiss, but they are not yet in the euro, hopefully never. And for the Swiss people, Swiss-speaking people. And I think that we are thinking of our own pocket, and so it's very difficult. When I worked with the IMI, I was telling some colleagues, I learned immediately this principle of subsidiarity, and Catherine could correct me if I'm wrong, where the member states are the one that rules in terms of budget. So the European Commission, with whom I collaborate, with this initiative, beautiful initiative, IMI, and now with the transatlantic collaboration on rare diseases, they are really sweating, blood and sweat every time that they form something at the European level, and this has to be translated at the national level. It's always a challenge. In reimbursement, is always like that. The Anmog law in Germany is a prototype of what I think has been the extremization of this, a company, the small medium enterprise, has to spend first the 300,000 euros, just to be blunt, in a consultant that will construct a dossier for reimbursability and to run a German trial to find evidence in an orphan disease. I think that to me the pendulum has swung in a little bit of a different directions. So the discussions are lengthy for pricing and reimbursement in many countries. The other thing is the dichotomy that we have sometimes or many times between regulatory authorization and which many times in Europe is based under exceptional circumstances, so based on a surrogate endpoint with the promise to collect real-world data afterwards. And the decision in terms of pricing and reimbursement that obviously are based on real-world clinical data. This is an intrinsic dichotomy, so either we take time, or it's obvious that even the EPAR, the European Public Assessment Report, is largely insufficient to address what will be the matter of discussion in HTA bodies or in the reimbursement agencies. And evaluation and the reimbursement methodology many times do not acknowledge the unique characteristics. So, for instance, many times we do not have comparator. So, and this is a challenge. An alternative treatment is precious in cases that you are really doing not marginal innovation, but something that will revolutionize treatment. An example, I found in our company, for instance, very, much easier to, discuss value in a context of a disease like multiple sclerosis that many of you know and many of the companies in this audience are developing, than, of course, in developing something for Niemann-Pick type B, because it's really much easier. You have a landscape, you have a platform where you can build your innovation, then measure your innovation, and then sit down with the payers and then say, given these results, and then you can measure results in larger patient populations. Jumping in view of time, a surrogate endpoint are extremely important. So one question that we could ask all of us is that, is health technology assessment, I think that Andrea said the right thing. Many times I found that HTA is really seen as, in very strict term, as the cost effectiveness. Health technology assessment to me is a nice term, so we should embrace this in the broader term of what it means. Health technology assessment of everything that has to deal with treatment and condition. So is ultimately feasible for orphan diseases? And if we say yes, and I think to me is a very big yes, then could this be done, for instance, at a pan-European level with maybe only or a different level where then with subsequent appraisal at the member state level? We're always fighting for this patient access, streamlining the procedures in order to streamline the process. So after all of these many questions, a little bit of reflection based on our personal and my personal experience of how to improve access. First, let's say clinical development. It is obvious, and one of the questions posed by the organizer was, should we include endpoints or health outcome endpoints in the design? The answer is obviously a rhetorical question. It's yes. The issue is that not definitely only at the level of the phase 3. When I say phase 3, I am perfectly aware that in the rare diseases, a phase 3 could be a hybrid, could be not, I think, what I call the good old times of the phase 1, 2, 3, because I don't think that this is something that will be accepted anymore, but there will be hybrid where we have maybe smaller patient population. But we need to include this, and we have to be creative. I think that somebody, before of the patient organization, I think that said very rightfully, what's in for the patients? So not more only the traditional, quality of life, but this enormous investments that companies are making and consultants and academia in patient-reported outcomes. We need to become better. So to the point, are we proficient? The answer is no. And everybody, let me tell you from somebody that, as I said, spent 20 years, I don't think that we are expert enough in that environment. We need to become better to facilitate a discussion with the patient, with the payers. So the patient outcomes, not only the symptoms, but also the other aspects of well-being. I think Hans, in his comment of MPS 1 of the famous internet case, did mention something that was very important. You remember that one of the first important picture of an MPS 1 patient that I saw outside of the clinical trial where the drug was approved with the walk test, which obviously one could debate how this relates outside of a regulatory environment into a real, I would say, a real clinical world effectiveness scenario. But this patient came and then insisted really that when we had in this presentation the pre-treatment, the post-treatment, insisted that he had in the second, the post, a comb in his hair, like that. And we said, why do you want that? I want to do this because before the treatment I could comb my hair. So for this patient, why? Because I don't want to enter into this, is obviously very related with the position in the joints. So there is a clinical, pathophysiological mechanism. But for this patient, it was important to have a picture of himself combing his hair. So for him, combing his hair, not for his hair, but was an important act of daily living, then maybe we're not definitely captured by one of these phenomenal scales. Is this important for the payers today? No, for us, not. For him, a lot. We need to really reflect on these type of things. So we need to really work on many issues, on the functioning, the disability, I would say I've worked so many years with the general health perception scales, SF-36 we have, and there the gospel is always let's validate, and then the challenge is that when you validate something in a small patient population, is always a little bit subjective. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. We have to go beyond that. Also, the disease condition-specific scales are also different. I remember when we studied well-differentiated thyroid cancer and the fact of giving a treatment that was recombinant thyroid-stimulating hormone to treat the patient. We wanted to study a special scale that we customized for the thyroid patient to report signs of hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism. They do not work. They work more from a statistical standpoint. Dimension specific, like pain, yeah, they work. But then we have to put into the equation also work disability. These people are lost for their physical ability to do something. Sometimes this is a real economical loss for society. Sometimes I always say that it's always a loss because many people think it's only the manual ability. But tell me, and I would like to talk with some of the patients, do you think how productive productive are you if you're suffering from a chronic debilitating disease that leaves your body intact, but then you are progressively, deteriorate? Do you think that, how many of us feel, work better when they feel better or worse? I mean, that we have to capture this type of things, and we need to do it in a way that is translatable. Health economics is important, is not so easy, but I feel that resources utilization, with what the impact that these resources has on the costs and the budgets. There was many times in some of the congresses where I go and we discuss about access, we neglected that the vast majority of the impact of economics in treating the diseases doesn't come from the drugs. It comes from the other parts. So we should really be able to record this and the cost of cares. And we should obviously, in the clinical development, educate payers. Regulators, I think, have done a good job on the analytical limitation of small patient population. We should really go out of the box, finding flexible, innovative trial designs. There was this Bible that for us was so important in the early days, the guideline for EMA on the clinical trial in small patient populations, so that really for us that work in that area meant a lot, because it was the recognition that the N of ones had the dignity sometimes, that if well done, to really have a regulatory a value. So if they have a regulatory value, why they shouldn't have with the appropriate definition, understand me well, but also in another setting. We should also use even some new ways, the adaptive design, so the Bayesian statistics. There are now also new methodologies like the value of information, calculate analysis, all these new disciplines that are emerging as an attempt to try to fill the gap that is existing. So we still have to go back to the school and learn how to develop this methodology to bridge the gap with the payers. I interpret this as the value of collaboration. Collaboration is not only sitting and discussing. Collaboration with the payers, regulators, academia, patients is to sit at the table and come out with something and agree on something that will be workable, sustainable, as somebody said. Additional strategies, as I said, education and training, value of developing a national or regional center of excellence. In rare diseases, to have the Italian syndrome of Leonardo, where every little village wants to have the voice in something, doesn't work. We need to group expertise. We've talked about registry, and we'll talk about registry afterwards, but we need to really build this center of excellence and really networks, and network of physicians, and facilitate all these type of things. Registries. We could spend, Andrea, the next 2 days talking of registries. Ségolène and I participate in very interesting discussions. She has one of the most I would say something that I admire, that she set up, something with her network, and that is extremely important, that with all the possible imperfection that every network has really opened, as an icebreaker, what should be done in order to accumulate evidence and let the patient, the physician understand more about rare diseases. I really would advocate that this will be more and more disease-specific. We, in Genzyme, when we started with Gaucher's disease, there were no drugs, nobody. It was a drug-specific because there was nothing. But I think that thanks God, there is now a little bit more of competition, a little bit more of also hopefully not always of the same drugs, but maybe of the next generation drugs, so that there will be stimulation for obsoleting something that is existing with something better. And there, why we should deprive the medical community, the payers and the regulators with the possibility to evaluate this in a clinical way that is relative to the broader disease, and not specifically if they have subcategories of diseases, so the data are really small. I really would advocate this to do it pre-approval. I would tell you honestly that there is one thing I've learned in my career developing drugs for diseases, for rare diseases, is that the value of natural history. If you do not know the natural history, forget it. You have no way to understand what you are looking at. Then you can put in place all these sophisticated measures, but you cannot have a perspective view. So I think that we should all work, and to work in the natural history means to me enhance the collaboration with the physicians and with the patient associations. And the value and the power there of patient associations and the collaboration and the level of importance that this can be achieved is enormous, really enormous. Another thing that is important, just conscious of time, Andrea, it's maybe consider an early access program. The early access program is another big chapter, and I think that if I'm correct, if I'm wrong, but it will be discussed tomorrow. And so there are also some companies that are even sponsoring there, so that will share their opinion on that. But early access program is extremely important, not for only the obvious reasons that are dear to the heart of the companies, because they generate some sort of access in terms of knowing the molecule, or sometimes even in certain cases some form of revenues, which, by the way, to me is not to be discarded if sustainability has to be achieved for a smaller company. But because they teach already, what will be the real clinical world in advance. But they come with a price. The price is that there are strong regulatory challenges. Again, I am familiar with all and every of the single member states of Europe regulation of named patient, patient access, compassionate, whatever you want to call it. They are all different. They are all different, and even the access rules are different. So when you want to implement something, for instance, pan-European, not to speak in a global, we are in the World Congress, so we should think outside of Europe, it's really challenging and expensive, operational. So making access, how to distribute your drug, maybe in the more sophisticated areas, is very difficult. And the risk and the benefits, of course, of exposing pre-approval. So should we really try to find also innovative pricing schemes in partnership with industry? So a potential solution is indeed maybe a managed entry scheme. So like to devise an alternative reimbursement approach to manage the entry of new therapy, maybe that could include an immediate, almost blinded, so from at least a pharmacoeconomic standpoint, provisional coverage, just to say, if there is enough evidence and could be discussed, we pay you. And then I think that the concept you expressed, we just almost buy back, or let's say leverage, with the evidence that is accumulated. Yeah, it's a possibility. There are various forms. That are the pay-per-performance, that are the schemes that are leveraging the health outcomes, or there are, I would say, more popular because they are much more certain for government financial outcomes, like the price volume agreements or the cap programs. The challenge is in setting them in rare diseases that setting these schemes is extremely complex. People like me that have worked with some of the countries we have had experiences, very complex. And the issue is always what to check, how to collect data, how to interpret the data, specifically when we are talking of small patient population. And then the judgment is very complex. Difficult, robust outcome measure to identify. Natural to progression again kicks in because it's not known, small patient population. Last but not the least, who owns the scheme? Seems a trivial question, but is it the company? It's the government? Is the patient association? Is the physicians association? Again, a trivial discussion seems, but believe me, very important when we hit some of these challenges there and then brought to not the failure, but at least a partial failure of this scheme. So, last two slides. The question was, will drug development shift to require evidence-based data? Of course, there is no question about it. We need to become smarter, new methodology, new really sitting on the same table and find together which are the data. The problem is that the external environment is changing much more faster than our internal environment in the rare diseases. So we have to speed up. Otherwise, we will really be constrained by the external environment that will assimilate us, even if we don't like it, to the other pharmaceutical products. So we need really to speed up these discussions. The special consideration for the orphan drug in the assessment and reimbursement scheme is being challenged, to say the least. I would say that finished are the times where there were exemptions. Then we could discuss, are exemptions still the way to go? Again, another long discussion to be made, but these are finished. There is nobody now that would just, consider the rare diseases, or very, very few countries that would consider this a privileged area where to say, you know what, we do not implement cost cuts. You can do, please come, be my guest, and we will reimburse. Nobody anymore. And what we try to do, and I think that Catherine probably discussed this morning, I was not there, we try to collaborate more by setting standards with the international, for instance, collaborative rare disease research consortium, to try to devise new ways in the pre-competitive area, maybe sometimes in sharing, just to at least accumulate information that could indeed, not ironically this time, but truly decrease the cost of clinical trials. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, as a community, we are all here represented, patient, medical professions. I heard no regulators, maybe somebody that had a regulatory life is here, and the companies, have we truly acknowledged that the challenges? Are we prepared to develop and agree? Because again, it's not only that we have to sit down at a table and just dissertate very eloquently. We need to agree to a new set of framework and concept that has to, really surpass the status quo. And I want to ask, I made a promise to myself that I would put almost at the end of every slide of my presentation, after many years, the same pictures. These are obviously as we said, to me, maybe less evocative, but equally important than the very moving movie that we saw. These to me represent the raison d'etre, why we are here. We are here for giving a family to a patient on the left that was going to die because of Gaucher's disease, and now as a father of 3 kids. And we are here to give a kid that would be dead by 8 months the possibility of riding that bike on the sea. So let me say, I think, Andrea, to come back to when you described, when you introduced myself, I've worked so many years in the industry, but still, by definition, I'm also a medical scientist. So let's never forget that the reimbursement and pricing always is predicated over good science. So let's always remember that the spirit and the intent to encourage the development of novel therapy for new drugs for rare diseases has to be maintained, because this is the primary engine. Innovation is the primary engine that will eventually be translated to pricing and reimbursement successes. Thank you.